Hey there, thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Des, and this is episode number 201. On today's episode, I am speaking with Kimberly Lorah. Kimberly Lorah is a therapist, but after her divorce, she shifted her practice to solely work with individuals going through divorce. She pivoted her entire practice. So she works with people in all stages and phases of their divorce journeys. Her marriage ended after 23 years together. In our conversation, Kimberly talks about how going through a divorce was one of the most painful experiences of her life, especially being a mother to children that she still had to care for. She describes it as the ground being ripped from beneath her. Anyone that has gone through a divorce or is currently going through a divorce, I'm sure that you can relate. So if that is you, I'm so sorry for what you are going through. I'm so sorry for what you have been through. And I really think that this conversation is going to be really helpful for you. If you have not been through a divorce, I still encourage you to listen to this episode, especially if you have a friend, family member, any loved one that has gone through or is going through a divorce, because it can be really difficult to figure out how to support that loved one, and Kimberly gives some really great tips in that area as well. I know that you're going to get a lot out of this episode. We talk about so much, so I won't delay any longer. Help me welcome Kimberly. All right, everyone, I am here with Kimberly Lorah. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We are talking about divorce. And so, as a therapist and divorce coach, I would love if to just get us started, you can introduce yourself, share your story with us, how you got to where you are today, how you got to specializing in working with people, with individuals going through a divorce.
Sure, absolutely. So, my name is Kimberly Laura, and like many people, I got married and I never imagined that divorce would really be part of my story. I met my husband in college and we got married after I finished graduate school. We were married for several years and I was working as a school counselor. He was moving up the ranks in his career. When we had our kids, I decided to put my career on hold and become a stay-at-home mom. So, my husband and I had this agreement. I would take a step back from my career as a therapist and a counselor so that I could raise the kids and run the household, and he would focus on building his career. And that was good for me. I was really all in, and I was passionate about helping people. I loved being a therapist, and I knew that one day I would return to counseling when the time was right. But during those years of raising my kids, my energy was really just completely devoted to my family. As you can imagine, I was deeply invested in my roles. I did things like volunteered at my kids' schools. I was active in our community. I helped support my husband's business. We spent a lot of time with our extended family. We had a large circle of friends that we enjoyed. So my identity and how I saw myself, it was almost entirely wrapped up in being a wife, a mom, and all these other roles that I played. So when my marriage ended, after 23 years, it really felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. And I felt like it wasn't just the loss of a relationship, but it was really the unraveling of who I thought I was. The roles that had given my life structure and meaning were either gone or forever changed. And I kept asking myself, like, okay, who am I? What comes next? What am I going to do? Am I going to be okay? So there were a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty. So when I went through my divorce, going through my divorce, it was one of the most disorienting and emotionally painful experiences of my life. And it shook me to my core. Everything. I questioned everything, my identity and my worth, my capacity to show up for others, everything, every part of me. And there were days that I felt like I was drowning in fear, shame, and grief. And I had to do all of this. I was just drowning and I was still trying to parent my kids, keep my life afloat, trying to maintain some kind of normalcy when everything that I knew as normal was just turned upside down. That experience, as devastating as it was, it really ultimately led to a profound transformation of myself and my life. And it cracked open in me in a way that allowed something new to grow, almost like a little acorn cracks open and out comes an oak tree. But those early days of divorce, they were filled with, like I said, fear and grief and overwhelming uncertainty and so much anger. I was so angry. But over time, I began to rebuild. And it wasn't just my life that I was rebuilding, but my sense of self. So I reconnected with my passion for supporting others. And I like to say that I turned my pain into purpose, even though it sounds cliche, it's absolutely true. And I discovered that even in the midst of heartbreak, there's an opportunity to heal and grow. And I became someone who is even stronger and more aligned with myself and my values than I ever was in my life. One of the biggest things that I struggled with during the ordeal was feeling alone. So I had family and friends supporting me, but nobody really seemed to understand what I was going through. I was really one of the first of my family and friend group to ever get divorced. And I was really worried about burdening everyone with my pain. So, where I am now, ultimately, I became the support person that I wish I had had when I was going through my divorce. Now I'm a divorce coach and a therapist, and I help others navigate all of the emotions, that emotional roller coaster of divorce. And I help them move through the heartbreak to their own healing. It was such a positive change, and it's turned out to be the most meaningful work of my whole career. So that's where I started. That's where I was, and this is this is where I am now.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think it is important to talk about this because I feel like it's almost divorce. It's kind of minimized, I think, in a way,
Mhm.
because I think because maybe it is so common, but divorce is a huge, huge life event. I mean, for some people, traumatizing. Like you said, it just
Mhm.
completely rocked your world, turned your life upside down. And I really like how you spoke about that too, of your roles, your identity, that it kind of rocks the basis of who you are and how you see yourself moving through the world.
Yeah, it really it affects so many things. If you think about it, it affects if you have kids, your time and relationship with your kids, your finances, maybe where you live. If there is betrayal or a high conflict divorce, it adds that extra layer of trauma. And the thing that's really hard is people don't recognize this type of loss, this grief, as if somebody had died. You know, somebody dies, we have rituals, funerals or shivas, people send cards, but people don't see us when we're grieving the loss of a marriage and all of those other associated losses. It's normalized or it's just overlooked, and that makes it really hard.
Yes, and I like how you brought that up too, that grief. I mean, not only the grief of the relationship, but those other griefs, the future plans, grieving the life you thought you were going to have together, grieving those different experiences that you won't be able to have as a family if you do have children. I mean, a lot of grief goes into that. And I think maybe people don't realize too that even the person, whether it's mutual or one person is the initiator of the divorce, that person holds a lot of grief as well. And it's hard for that
Mm-hmm.
person too.
Yeah. And sometimes that person, guilt is another word, another another G word, right? Guilt and grief. It really is an emotional roller coaster, and it feels like temporary insanity. When I was going through my divorce, I knew I wasn't really, really crazy, but I did feel like I was crazy. Everything was kind of unraveling. This emotional volatility, it could be so intense. Like you just kind of swing back and forth. Sometimes you're numb, detached, and then you're sobbing or you're screaming in a pillow. Your memory isn't working, decision making, when you need to make decisions, at a time that you need to make these really big decisions, it's so overwhelming. Yeah, there's a lot of emotions, both for the people that, if you leave a marriage, if you are left, right, the dumper, the dumpy, or if it's mutual, there's still so many different emotions.
Oh, absolutely. And like you mentioned before, you didn't expect to get divorced. That's not what you had thought going into your marriage. And I'm sure most people feel that way, right? That they don't go into their marriages expecting to get divorced. So,
Right.
with working with the individuals that you work with, are you seeing any sort of common themes or any significant issues, like repeated issues that you're seeing that lead people to divorce?
Like you said, very few people enter marriage thinking, this is going to end one day. We're thinking happily ever after. And when that doesn't happen, it could be devastating. I think in general, most couples, they genuinely love each other and they want to make things work, but But these relationships, they're dynamic. It's two different people, and then there's the actual relationship. So it's almost like three different entities. And life happens, people change, and sometimes they change in different directions. But one of the biggest factors I see is really disconnection. It could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be just spiritual in ways that you view the world. And it often starts small. What I found in people that are getting divorced or who have been divorced is when they look back, they really see that communication breaks down. So it could be a missed conversation. Over time they drift apart and conflicts start to go unresolved. Emotional needs aren't voiced, and then resentment builds. And so instead of leaning in and really communicating and talking about it, many partners start leaning away. Maybe they get over involved in work or parenting. They become distracted with a variety of other things, maybe even infidelity. And I like to talk to people about the analogy of it's like water dripping on a car. There's a one drip, and then the car turns wet in that spot, and then it starts to rust. And if it's, not addressed, it turns into total corrosion. And all of these little drips, they have a destructive effect when they're cumulative and they're not addressed. So, before you know it, what starts as a little drip, you've got a big rusty corroded car if you're not careful. So it's a series of little disappointments, missed opportunities to connect, to communicate. And then before you know it, you're there.
I really like that analogy. And I was asking that question because I was wondering, you had said that lack of support and that, maybe loved ones in your life, either they haven't been through a divorce or they don't really know how to support. And for a lot of people, their main sense of support is their partner. And maybe that's not the
Hmm.
case for somebody going through a divorce anymore, right? And maybe it hasn't been for a long time. So that's why I was kind of asking that too, what leads to that, because it definitely does seem like that lack of support in the relationship, that lack of connection, in
Hmm.
that dynamic. Thinking about that, what kind of support can loved ones offer to the individual in their life going through a divorce? Because thinking about that guilt, that shame, that temporary insanity that you talked about, just those all those volatile emotions, especially if there's children involved. How can people support their loved one going through a divorce?
It's really, being present, right? What's the expression? Offer your presence as a present, as a gift. Just being there for somebody. People that are going through a divorce might not even know what they need. They might not know if they need somebody's shoulder to cry on or somebody to listen to them, somebody to be a sounding board, someone to help them pick up the kids. So being there for somebody is really important. They might not need advice, they might not need your horror stories. An attuned companionship, being there without judgment, without trying to fix things, that's really powerful. And that's an incredible gift. Offering practical help, letting them cry, vent, question stuff, reminding them of their strength, and not in a way that pushes them to be strong, but reassuring them that they still are strong and worthy inherently, no matter what's going on around them. So, really, just being there for somebody, non judgmental, just holding space for them is really, really important, especially in the beginning.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I think that's going to be really helpful for people to know when they don't really know how to help. They want to be a support, but they don't really know exactly.
Hmm.
So, also thinking about that, how you mentioned that temporary insanity during the divorce process, I'm wondering how that looks and how does this process of divorce and this just high levels of stress impact somebody's mental health?
Right. Well, like I said, temporary insanity, that's exactly what I felt. And it's actually based on neuroscience. So divorce activates in our nervous system the fight, flight, or freeze response, and sometimes the fawn. And it's a trauma response because as we mentioned earlier and throughout, divorce really is a trauma. So your sense of safety is under threat, right? You're being attacked, your welfare, your safety. So emotionally, financially, socially, all of these areas are in question. So your body and your brain really respond accordingly. You become in a state of hypervigilance, survival mode. So your mental health really can take a big hit. anxiety, depression, panic attacks, sometimes sleep disturbances, self-doubt. All of these are really common. It's important to remember that even if you feel like you are going crazy, this temporary insanity, you might feel like that, but you're not really crazy, right? Because feelings aren't facts. You might feel like you're going crazy, but you're really grieving. And you're grieving and navigating one of life's most stressful transitions. And this is real and valid and it is temporary. So with the right support, you will eventually stabilize and heal, but it's important to also realize that this is your body's way, your brain's way of protecting you and doing what it's supposed to do when you are at risk.
And what would you say, from your maybe personal experience, but also with the individuals you work with? Are there any specific areas in the process of divorce that you would say are some of the hardest parts?
There's a lot of really difficult parts. If divorce is really impacting every layer of your life, legally you have to make these legal decisions. Socially, your social group might be breaking up, financial, emotional, realizing that grief is hard, loss is hard. It is a huge identity shift. And going from being a couple to being alone, that means you might be a single parent, adjusting to single life. You might have to move, face judgment and misunderstanding. A lot of the uncertainty, it's all really hard, but it's all really normal, right? So normalizing, realizing that this is really hard and giving yourself that space and grace and knowing that things might be uncertain, but there are areas that you can control. And going back to the things that you can control, realizing that your feelings are normal. So you are going through a really difficult situation. So letting yourself feel the feelings is important too. Saying no to things that you used to say yes to, knowing that you don't need to please people all the time and it's okay to put your needs first. So, really realizing that you need to take care of yourself during this process, during all of these really hard things.
Definitely. Oh, I fully agree with that. And thinking about how difficult the divorce process is and how this can be really traumatizing, what can people maybe look forward to after? Is there a bright light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of times people look at divorce as an ending, but if you think about transitions, endings usually start beginnings, right? So we've got graduations, a marriage. The ending of a marriage could be a new and incredible beginning in a lot of different areas, right? Like maybe moving houses, like I said before, graduations, getting promoted in a job. Endings are really beginnings. So for many people, when their marriage ends, it's the first time that they could truly pause and say, well, what do I want? Who am I now? What type of life do I want to create? And it's in their own terms. When you have these new beginnings, you can shed roles, like really begin to shed roles that no longer serve you, getting rid of expectations that no longer fit. You get to start aligning with your own values and setting boundaries. You can begin to trust yourself and speak your truth. And one of the most exciting things that I see, both with my own experience and with working from clients, is you get to rebuild from a place of intention and not obligation. So, I've watched countless clients go from heartbreak to wholeness, and they get to discover new passions, things that they might not have been able to do when they were married. They can deepen their self worth, create healthier relationships, not necessarily romantic, but just with other people in their lives. And sometimes they even become better parents because they are out of what might have been a toxic situation. So really, remembering that endings are really beginnings.
Oh, I really love that. What tips do you have or words of wisdom or advice for somebody that is maybe in different phases in the divorce process? Whether it's they're thinking about getting divorced, the maybe divorce is getting finalized, they're in the middle of, this havoc. What words of advice or tips do you have for individuals?
So I think it's really important to get support early and get support often. Really knowing what you need and being able to ask for it. Because, like I said before, it really is okay to not be okay. And it's okay to say no. It's okay to ask for help. Vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but it's a sign of strength. If you surround yourself with people who don't judge you and who remind you of that strength and that worthiness when you forget, that is super important in lifting you up and really not rushing the healing. You can't skip over it. You can't skip over the pain. You can't just fast forward through the grief. One of my favorite things to say to people is you have to go through it to get through it and then to grow through it. So, like we spoke about a minute ago, growing through divorce, endings as beginnings, coming back to your true self, your best self. Divorce could be messy, but it could also be really a time to get back to your roots. You're allowed to take your time and, take little bites, little steps, because little steps still get you moving and little bites prevent you from choking. So give yourself that grace and that space and that patience that you deserve because it is a really hard thing you're going through.
That is great advice. And I'm wondering, do you have any specific advice that if you could go back in time and give advice to yourself for your individual divorce, what would you say to your past self?
I think for sure I would have given myself more grace and space and not try to always put on a brave face, not always trying to put other people's needs ahead of my own, not, trying to be strong and put together when I was really crumbling inside. I think that would have helped my healing a lot more if I had that kind of support. I didn't believe it then, but now I know that, all of the things that I was feeling it was so normal, which is really funny for a therapist to say, like, I didn't know that, feeling grief at the end of the marriage was normal. I mean, I knew that in my head, but as a person experiencing that divorce, I felt really abnormal. Like, well, this shouldn't be hurting as hard as it is. I did a lot of shoulding. I should be able to do this, and I need to be able to do that. I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I think I would have given myself a lot more compassion.
Oh, absolutely. I think that self-compassion is so important, especially if people are feeling guilty or they're maybe blaming themselves, or maybe they do have some responsibility, right, in why the
Hmm.
divorce is happening, why the relationship is ending. So really practicing that self-compassion, I think, is so
Yes,
important.
divorce is hard for sure, but you can make it through it. And there is a light on the other side, a light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm so glad that you said that. I'm so glad that you're here to share your story and your services and give these words of wisdom and just normalize those really difficult feelings that
Hmm.
people experience in a divorce, because it is huge. It's a huge deal. Like you said, it's an ending, but it is a new beginning, but it completely changes your life.
When you're deep in that grief or survival mode, happiness does really feel like a foreign concept. It's hard to imagine that you'll ever be happy again, but it's part of the process and healing. It's not a straight line, and this moment is not forever. Even if you don't believe it right now, you will find peace again and you will laugh again and you will, experience love and joy. It's really learning to trust life again. So, trust that your pain does have purpose. It's telling you something because pain really means something's wrong. It's okay to feel that pain because something is wrong. You are hurting. And that, happiness isn't a destination. It's something that you begin to create in tiny little steps. Like I said before, tiny steps, little bites, and having faith that we're actually really choosing to believe that your story isn't over. So, baby steps, grace and space, little bites, and keep going.
Oh, great. Kimberly, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story and talking about this really important topic with me today. I would love if you can share where everyone can find you.
Sure. The name of my private practice is Blossom Coaching because I do believe that you could blossom through divorce, which is why I named my private practice Blossom Coaching. My website is kimberlylorahcoaching.com. And I do offer consultations. So if you'd like to talk, just chat, I'm always open for that. And you could find me on Instagram and Facebook also.
Okay, perfect. Everyone, I am going to put all of those links in the show notes, so definitely go check out Kimberly. Kimberly, thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.